Hello, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Kurtis, Jay, greetings. Welcome to episode 6 of Under the Hoodie, sponsored by VoiceFlip.
Awesome.
Jay, it is an honor and a privilege to have you in this virtual space to talk artificial intelligence and real estate and other stuff. Thanks for being here. Thanks for accepting the invitation, largely kind of sight unseen. I mean, you asked very few follow-up questions about what this is all about, actually, now that I think about that.
Well, I like to take risks a little bit. I think we're actually going to cover that today. I think there's a good balance between, being a little risky and taking a chance here and there, and also just planning for the future. I think there's a way to balance it so that you're not, always off in left field.
Beautiful. Well, yes. I mean, you're kind of the quintessential guest for this podcast, because we do discuss. I mean, the themes are Kurtis being the creator of AI, literally the CEO of an active and progressive and burgeoning, thriving artificial intelligence company in the real estate space. Me being an eager and sometimes maybe naive user of artificial intelligence. And now you are this perfect, exemplary, you're a change agent, I think is the term that I was planning on using for you. So
Cool.
Everyone having seen episode 1 through 5 of, I assume, and now arriving at episode 6, knows who Kurtis and myself are. Jay, why don't you take a second and just describe who and what you are?
Sure. So I'm currently the CTO at the San Francisco Association of Realtors. I've been there for a little over a decade now, living in San Francisco for part of that time. Before I came to San Francisco to take the job running the MLS there, I had actually been working at a software company called Point Two Technologies, which then became Yardi. And I think some of the products that we worked on, back in 2008, 2009, some of them are still in the current Yardi offering. There's little kernels of things we did with like geofencing and some of the map-based stuff we worked on. So today I'm mainly just trying to stay abreast of all the different technologies that affect our industry, the ones that impact our industry. And boy, did the AI one ever hit us like a ton of bricks a couple of years ago. So I'm trying to stay focused on looking at where we can find new opportunities, because I'm concerned that we maybe are faced with some pretty serious existential threats, and I want us to make sure that we at least think about how to address them in a way that's a little faster. So I'm a musician, I'm a technologist, I'm an early adopter, but I'm also a skeptic, which sometimes people don't understand what I mean when I say that. And what I mean is I want to try these things out and find out as fast as I can if they're bullshit, if I can say that.
Yeah, I'm a builder of AI technology, and I'm also a skeptic, Jay. So I think a healthy dose of skepticism is very helpful in any kind of technology field. I mean, so it's fantastic.
Agree. Yep, we agree.
And Jay, you operate in a pretty unique, decision-making ecosystem, in that you are, your role is to be kind of a lighthouse of out there looking at new and exciting things. You are in San Francisco. You're literally the shadow of Silicon Valley, where a lot of these things happen. But you're also working in an environment that is fairly traditional. You are subject to board approval, and in an environment that necessarily doesn't always lend itself to quick snap decisions.
Yeah.
So you carry this kind of dichotomy in that you're out there trying to be progressive, but you also are beholden to a more traditional decision-making process.
Yeah. So how do you sort of work with both? I think is the real question. How do you be progressive and still work with those structures? I'm really grateful that we've had a very involved leadership group that's been volunteering for the San Francisco Association for the 13 years that I've been there. Our board is pretty progressive, and they are willing to take a chance on something if it's explained to them what the opportunity is. And so my job isn't just to find some of these technologies and talk to people like Kurtis and figure out how they work. It's also to turn around and figure out how to communicate that in a way that makes sense to people who want to understand, how does this matter for my business rationale? How does this actually move the needle for what I'm trying to do? How does this help me in the future? How does it help me not get left behind? And so we've been really, I think, focused on communicating really clearly what the opportunities are, but also being honest and saying, we get it right 3 times out of 5 or 2 times out of 5. We'll take a shot. And sometimes it works out really well. Like we've got a software for doing disclosures that came basically from San Francisco. This is front-loading disclosures is important in California. So that was something that came out of just discussions with our board, and eventually a product was spun off and created for that. Very successful. And we've had ones that, sometimes it's an interesting experiment, but it didn't go where we thought, or it was the right thing to do. And then a vendor will sometimes get bought by a larger company, and navigating that can be a bit of a challenge sometimes too.
Yeah, Kurtis, you and I have worked together quite a bit in scenarios like this where we meet, the Jays of the world, and everyone's very excited about the what we would call practical applications of artificial intelligence, which I think are just now getting started, particularly in our industry. Um, you Kurtis has told stories offline about how difficult is the term, but also there's caution I think is necessary in these cases. Kurtis, maybe now more than ever, particularly when launching products that are really brand new.
Yes. Is that a question, Bill? Or is that?
Yeah, I was tossing you away to say something like, yeah, this process is slow, but it's necessarily slow.
Yes, it is necessarily slow. You're right. Actually, I had a question for you, Jay. So you're in San Francisco, the West of innovation in the U.S. Do you find that your decision making is quicker there, or your board's more willing to adopt new tech, or more willing to let you guys fail when you adopt a new tech? Because that's how like startups run. You move fast, you fail, you learn from it. Is that in your culture in the San Francisco Association of Realtors, or?
It is. And like I say, we've delivered some things really successfully and some things have just not gone anywhere. And so they're aware of the fact that sometimes it's going to work out fabulously and sometimes it won't. But the real struggle is actually that when you're part of a network of MLSs, like we're part of an alliance, and if they're not all sort of moving at the same speed, we do have this one problem where if we get out a little too far ahead of some of our MLS partners, the thing we're trying to do doesn't work well because we don't have their consent to use all of their data for the entire greater aggregated service area. And so that can be a bit of a struggle where I've got to not only prove it to my board, who's willing to maybe say, you know what, we trust Jay, it's worked out. We trust Hud Bixler, who's my right-hand man, or I'm his, however that works. Him and I are like, thick as thieves. So they trust us, but it's harder to also have that expand to the greater MLS network because some of them have different business processes or even ownership models. One of the MLSs is fully broker owned. One is like a private corporation where the brokers own shares in it. Some of us are association owned MLSs. So you got these mixes of ownership types and boards of director, and so from that, it does make the decision-making process a little more challenging, but sometimes when we see a great thing, we go for it anyway. And then there's been a couple of cases where we've been able to lead the way. And there's been a couple of cases, if I'm being perfectly honest, where we tried something, we wanted everyone to come with us, and it ended up being kind of better that they didn't because the idea didn't work out long-term.
Yeah. So let's talk about your personal decision-making process when it comes to artificial intelligence. I know you're to be an early adopter. I know you to be a thoughtful guy. And so tell us about kind of how you encountered artificial intelligence first and what's your current attitude about, again, this term practical use.
Yeah, practical use. So generative AI is a bit controversial because on that side of things, when it first emerged, as an artist myself, I certainly wasn't cool with the fact that these models were basically looking at every image that had ever been created by any human ever, listening to every piece of music that had ever been written by any artist ever, reading everything that had ever been published by any author ever. And they really weren't paying for it. They were really just taking that content and using it to build training systems and things for training their models on. And so that gave me a bit of a heartburn at the outset. But I also saw how it could be used, not as a thing to create a good idea, because it really doesn't do that. But what I found very early was that if I already had an idea, it would help me explore parts of my idea where there was a dark corner where I didn't see that there was a dark corner in the idea I was having. And so what I found is it was really good to ask it a ton of questions and then tell it was wrong and keep asking it questions, at least on the generative side. Now, on the practical application side, I was seeing something completely different. I was seeing things like, oh, I understand. It's taking all these Word documents that I wanted to analyze and it's tokenizing them. And it's building me a way to analyze those Word documents. And that's I wouldn't call it bulletproof because I don't like that term, but it was pretty darn reliable. And I could actually lean on it a little bit. I could say, shit, I got 3 versions of this document that are fragmented. This one was edited by a lawyer. This is the one that we've been editing internally. This is one that has feedback from a professional realtor. And I just needed to find all the differences. And so it was just a way easier and faster way to do like diff merges and compared documents. And even upon, review manually with a ruler and looking through them, we were pretty clear, pretty confident that the changes it was finding were real. And so it was really giving us speed. And so on that side of it, I thought it was a great tool to have right out of the gate. And we started using it right away. Now, one of the first things, of course, we had to do was we realized that if we're just using the free models, probably everything we're putting in goes right into the training slop. And I didn't want that to happen. So we took the step and got accounts for every employee of the company at SFAR so that if they want to use it, they're allowed to, and they use the one that's tied to their SF identity. And then it's within our sort of management, and we have a reasonable level of certainty that it's not slipping out into some training model. But maybe Kurtis knows more about how that works.
Do you? Well, it definitely. If you're using the free version of it, your information is definitely going to OpenAI.
Yeah, I thought so.
Or whatever it is. I know it's in the terms of service. Yeah. They say it'll be after 2 years it gets added in, but it's still added in at some point, right? But do you guys limit which model your staff can use? Like, does you all have like an OpenAI account or?
Yeah, I pulled them at the outset and I said, what do you like based on your experiences right now? And a couple of them said, well, what do you like, Jay? And I was like, well, I like Claude. For whatever reason, it was the one I sort of got to really use quite a bit initially and found some really remarkable ways that it would communicate with me. I mean, I understand these things aren't human, and I'm one of the people that does not believe LLMs are a path to AGI. I don't believe scaling is going to get us there. But I did find that Anthropic's Claude would say things to me in a way that I found just more accessible. And OpenAI was kind of like, didn't do that for me. So I told staff I use Claude, but I also see why people like OpenAI's, ChatGPT. I see why people are using Copilot because they just want it to be built into their Outlook experience if they're Outlook users. So I let my staff choose, and most of them chose OpenAI. They wanted ChatGPT. And a few of them chose Copilot because they're using this at work and they don't need this in their personal lives. And then I think I'm the only person that at the end of the day is still using Claude. And so I'm using all three of those. I'm using ChatGPT for work, Claude for work, and for personal. Then I have 2 accounts so that I keep it separate. And then I'm using Copilot integrated in our Microsoft 365 instance.
That's awesome. So you guys actually see performance gains, let's say, or improvements in your staff with using it? Because there's a whole bunch of studies that have come out recently, I guess, that say, LLMs promise all these increase in productivity, but most big companies aren't actually realizing those increases in productivity. So you guys are actually seeing, like, on a personal level, I am way more productive using an LLM like Claude or ChatGPT when I'm doing my work. So those studies never quite made sense to me. But we're a small organization. We're a startup,
And you're a really technical guy or person. And so
Yes.
For you, you're going to see gains. Here's what I've sort of observed. And I think it might be true for the real estate industry at whole, but I'd like to know what you guys think too, is I think it's going to make good agents phenomenal. And it's going to make mediocre agents no better, or they'll look less capable compared to these pretty talented people that also go to the next level and figure out how to use agentic systems to enhance their capabilities in ways that if you just don't know how it works, you're not going to be able to take advantage of it. And then I think the people at the very bottom, they get lifted a little because it gets them out of the gutter. So the people in the middle get nothing. The people at the top get astronomical benefit, and the highly technical people are in that category. And then people at the bottom get a lift because now it like helps them with basic spelling and some other things that maybe they were challenged with before. But yeah, the people in the middle are the ones who don't really see an advantage here, in my opinion. Maybe you guys have seen something different out there.
Well, I have a lot to say about that, and we don't have enough time. But I will tell you this, that a lot of my work outside of the voice flip, strategic advisory, is helping MLSs figure out how to lift all boats.
Yeah.
And looking at agent productivity analysis, which is kind of the core of what I'm doing right now. 80% of the real estate population is part-time.
Right.
And 30% of those haven't had a deal in over 3 years. And so if you look at those numbers and then you hand them a tool, I think a lot of the population of agents, and we just have real talk here, that you have like the top of this pyramid is always searching for tools.
Yeah.
And is willing to dive in. And we could call them early adopters, but that's not really a perfect term for this mindset. And then a lot of people just want something done for them, meaning that they're waiting for a technology that they can continue doing what they're doing, but it's only going to make them more productive. These models require input. These models require prompts. They require an activity from the user in order for you to be better. This isn't just going to happen to you. And so I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is a separation between, it's going to make the good agents far more productive only because they are already productive. I'm not sure it's going to make the non-productive productive.
Yeah, because you can't get something from nothing, right? This is sort of classical physics, is if they're not doing anything, well, then adding a tool that makes them hyper productive at nothing, guess what? It's not happening. But yeah, if those people are doing a lot of transactions, now they can scale it a little faster, a little more. They can do a little more because there's some stuff they can offload cognitively onto a tool that's going to help them do it. But where the risk is here is that if we offload a bunch of this cognitive activity to a tool, you still do need to be the executive level of understanding what that process is doing. And so if it screws up, you're still responsible. And that's one of the things we're really trying to emphasize when we roll out these tools with agents is these are cool tools. They do cool things. Look at all this coolness. And you're still 100% responsible for what it does. So check the work. So that's one of the reasons why I think people are at large software companies and other types of IT companies and information companies aren't seeing the benefits, because they can use these tools to do a shitload of work, a bunch of work, but then they still have to check it. And so if you're not doing the check step, you can have errors creep in from, the things that we're familiar with. Either it's a hallucination or maybe sometimes in a streaming process, right? An LLM will just stop. And if you don't notice that it didn't finish, well, then you could be missing the bottom 30% of the content it was trying to give you. And if you just don't supervise it, you're unaware. So, I mean, it does help you go faster, but you do have to check your work. And that also has a cost. So,
yeah, for agents, I've been thinking lately, I think for agents, they get more benefit from automations than they would from actual AI. Like if we're setting two technologies out, I think something that automated a lot of their processes and lets them become, or let them do what they're good at, which is go talk to people,
right?
Systems with people. I think that's where the benefit lies with agents, as opposed to, hey, typing a bunch of shit into OpenAI and getting some responses back.
And AI is not going to make them better at those personal relationship management strategies, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's their, I assume if you're an agent, I assume that is your strength. You are good at talking to people, holding someone's hand, walking them through a building, saying everything's going to be fine. And then you can let automation kind of do the pointless, busy shit in your business that you really don't want to do.
No, I think that's true.
Yeah. Well, switching gears a little bit, Jay, you mentioned a minute ago that you're an artist, and I want to focus in on that, because a big part of what AI offers us, and you mentioned this a minute ago too, is an opportunity to view all of what we do in terms of intellectual property, where the human and the robot overlap, and where the good turns into the bad quickly, and what our responsibilities are around that. And I know that you're a musician, and I know that as a musician that, EDM is that's electronic dance music, kids, for those of you who are uninitiated. And EDM foundation is samples and clips and beats and so forth. And a lot of these things are computer generated, and a lot of them are generated and then sold in packages for you to then utilize and create. So it's like a box of paint that you can then use, but someone had to mix the paint. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts as a musician, and how do those thoughts about intellectual property overlap into your professional life?
Wow, this is a huge topic, but I'm glad you're asking it, because there's a lot of parallels here. So just to talk about it from the artist standpoint for 1 second, there are some really huge piss-offs about AI-generated music. So this is different than having AI tools in your music. That's one thing. Let's first of all talk about this big thing over here that's where AI is now creating music. And I think there's two primary problems in it. One is that when you create music with this stuff, I have all the tracks and I can modify things on one track at a time. I can add effects and do whatever. When something that's an AI engine is just generating music, it's sort of generating the whole song as a complete slice, microsecond by microsecond. It's filling in the next thing based on what it believes the next thing should be, based on every previous thing, based on every other thing that's ever been done, if you follow me. And so it's not really thinking about it in terms of the drum line, or in terms of the bass line, or in terms of what's the high energy synth line that's going to make people's hair stand up in the back of their neck. That's what a human knows how to do by using multi-tracking. And this AI garbage that we get out of these purely AI generated music sort of feels soulless for that reason, because it doesn't understand that there's elements going on. So that's why I don't think that's going anywhere. And the last thing I'll say about that is, I don't think I'm ever going to be interested in it, because the reason why I listen to music is because I like the fact that you made that music, Bill, and you're a human. And I'm wondering, when I'm listening to your music, what's the human feeling? what's the human thinking on the other side of it? Like, I view that exchange of music between two people who know each other as sort of, it's a type of deep communication. Like, you're seeing something very raw when you hear a song of mine. Maybe it's got sort of an industrial bent or a sort of a sadness to it. And you'll hear that in the music, and that'll be conveyed. And you'll know that that's coming from Jay. It's not coming from something that predicted that the next note needs to be a minor based on the fact that the previous three notes were minors or whatever. So I think that's why AI music's not going to be a thing, because there's no human connection there. And I think that music is a connection. It's a type of language that we used to speak. But go ahead.
Go on. Sorry, I had a quick comment on that because I'm not a musician. I know both of you are. From my understanding, you can create a hit, let's say, like a pop hit that'll play on the radio, whatever, and it's all based on the mathematics. You know how to create an earworm, or people know how to create earworms nowadays because of math. Whatever, you drop the beats. I don't know.
They're called formulas. Often it's called formula music sometimes. Okay. But yeah,
formula music. But would AI not be able to create those? Like, that seems like a very simple thing for you to do.
Yeah, but
it's popular with the majority of the population, right? So
100%.
Not a threat to music.
It is. But again, what it's going to come down to is one of the reasons people will like an artist is because they're having what's called a parasocial relationship with that artist. Usually, like, they're really into, whoever is the big thing right now because that person has an identity and they maybe advertise themselves in a certain way, or they carry themselves in a way that people like. They don't fall in love with it. Some of them do for sure, but I think they just identify with it. And that becomes really part of the whole experience, is that social relationship. It's hard to have that with a CPU. I mean, I'm really into this new Mac Studio I got back here, but I still wouldn't say I'm having a parasocial relationship with that computer. It's a great computer. It's helping me write some pretty crazy music. So what do I mean? That yes, it might have all the formulas, but it's still going to convey all that in a way that doesn't have this one guy's voice, or doesn't have this one girl's way she does vocal fry, or doesn't have this one really wicked synthesizer that the producer knew when he was working with the artist. I'm going to write the synth line with this brilliance to it, and it's going to have this delay sound. Like, it's just not going to know how to do that as part of the formula, even though it knows exactly how to build the right intro, how to build the right first verse, chorus, second verse, bridge. It'll know how to do all that, but I just don't think it's going to be able to do it in a way that conveys the emotional connection. But I could be proven wrong here in a few years. We're going to find out.
Can I ask you about the copyright law around that? So, Suno AI, Udio, I think, is also another music generating program. Yep. And the way the models work is they trained on songs, right? And toward the builder models. And now Universal Music Group and a whole bunch of other companies are going after them for partnerships or whatever it is.
Right.
Now, how do I explain this? How do I frame my question properly? As an artist, you also trained on songs from other people, right?
I did, yeah. Nine Inch Nails, Boards of Canada. These are my influences. Lauren, I got
right.
Lauren.
But, so you're not paying what do you call those?
Royalties
to the royalties. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shouldn't let that line up.
But
AI models have to, but they're kind of just like a little, brain that lives on a computer.
Yeah. You've got a point, but I would say in counterpoint to that I certainly went to a Nine Inch Nails concert last month, and that definitely didn't cost me nothing. I have a lot of memorabilia, Boards of Canada. In the other room, I have a bunch of vinyl records that are from this guy I've mentioned called Lauren, which I would highly recommend anyone check out if they want to really get in touch with their darker emotional side. This guy Lauren, or if you want to listen to some of the stuff that I write. But so I do spend money to acquire the things about these artists because it's good. And then some of the artists that are in the EDM side of the scene that I am also involved in do sell sample packs of the stuff that they have used, their building blocks, their little Lego pieces, right? A snare, the way a kick drum sounds, the way they have programmed a particular kind of synthesizer to sound. You can sort of buy that stuff and then reintegrate that in your own work. And I do that. But about samples, there's a weird thing here where how much of it needs to be original before it's original. So if I take a sample out of a song, well, that's sampling clearly. But then if I go get the sound of the snare from the artist, well, that's still sampling, but it's even closer to the source of origin. But then that snare was built by a person who builds drums. Well, then I got to build my own snare drum to get a really original snare. So now I'm building snare drums, right? And then I realize this piece of the head of the drum, I'm buying that from a vendor. Now I got to learn how to make drum heads. Now I got to learn how to tan leather. My point is that at some point you're no longer getting a benefit from going as close as you can to the origin of the creation of the sample. Are you using it creatively? And I think that's actually true with a lot of stuff that we're doing, even in real estate. Yeah, I'm taking a photograph and I'm using AI to edit the photograph. I'm changing the sky. I'm lightening it slightly. I may be restaging it. There's a bunch of really cool staging software out there. Now we're using Colab in San Francisco, and you can, edit photos using AI. Do I have to go to the actual unit and take all the furniture out and put in these different sofas or these slightly different pieces of art on the wall? Or was it effective for me to communicate the difference by using AI to make some changes? So again, do you have to go right to the very origin of creating the content for it to be real? Or are you just trying to communicate something that's valuable? And if it's valuable, you're communicating, then I'm all for it. And if it's not valuable what you're communicating, then I'm kind of opposed to it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. All right. The scary part about this, and this is a regular segment, because Kurtis and I try to make this podcast as legit as possible with regular segments. But if we were going to set the stage here for our regular segment, it would be things we're excited about and things that we're completely freaked out about. And music,
I'm freaked out about some stuff,
comes up every single time. Like, I am most concerned that there are companies out there trying to portray AI produced content as human produced content.
They are.
And to me, as long as there's a dividing line between those two things, me as a consumer, that I understand that there's one label for one and another, I am convinced that human created art is only going to increase in value over time, because we now have what isn't human created art, because I think human created art has been undervalued for many years, like MLS data, for example. But now we're crossing streams. But you know the idea.
You're onto some really important points there. What was the guy from Spotify saying a few months ago? He's like, I don't think people want to go through all the work of making music. I think people just want to push a button and get some music for free. And he said a couple of other things that were really I'm thinking of the Suno guy that said that, actually. The Spotify fella had the thing where he was saying that artists' materials that they create aren't really valuable because you can get them anywhere, right? Like, artist materials everywhere. So there's been a couple of these sort of shitty opinions come out of that side of music and AI. But sorry.
The right point of that is Udio and Universal Music Group just came to an agreement to do the joint venture. So it's going to be a whole new product we're launching, but basically any song created with Udio from now on is going to actually kick back to the artists who are on Universal Music Group, which I think is fantastic. Any song trained on data, or any song created with data trained on other songs, will kick back to the artists. At least they're making money off of AI generated songs. I think
that's interesting.
The right step. And I think that's probably how the industry will eventually go.
Until it gets fully enshittified. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with Cory Doctorow, and you know about the enshittification cycle. Yes, so if that happens in the music industry, what I love about the fact that I do make my own music is that the dystopian nightmare of it all being AI generated and I can't find the humans, I'll just go, okay, that's enough of that. I don't need any of that anymore. And I'll just, make my own music and listen to myself, because I know what I'm thinking and feeling. So that's like the worst case scenario. But I don't think it'll come to that. I think Bill's point about a human content is going to have this amazing value that emerges over the next couple of years. I think that's actually where this is going to go. And then to bring it back to MLS data, I think the same thing. MLSs are going to figure out that this data is really where the core value lies, and we're going to figure out more interesting ways to deploy it. So right now we're just using data feeds, right? We used to have RET servers, and then we had APIs, and then we used the APIs to do exactly what we were doing with the RET servers, which is replication. Nobody is really building applications on an MLS API because, what if I have to get data from 3 MLSs? Now I'm relying on 3 APIs. You guys know how all that works. So that's why that sort of doesn't work. But here come these other systems that are going to sit between our APIs and the interfaces that people are getting comfortable using, like OpenAI's ChatGPT and whatever else. And so these components are going to sit in between our APIs and the public who just chats to the stuff. And I think that's where we're going to need to be as MLSs. And so we're trying really hard to figure that out right now and work on that. And for anyone who hasn't sort of read about them, they're model context protocol modules. They understand some commands they're allowed to execute against an API set, and then they know how to repackage that and spit it out in an LLM sort of friendly output. So we're investigating that pretty heavily, but that's one of those things, to speak back to what we were talking about at the top. there's some risk. What if that's a brand new technology that ends up not being the thing in 18 months? These things are changing so fast. Kurtis, I am absolutely blown away by how fast you guys have to keep up with the emerging leading edge of where it's at. It's very impressive, and it's daunting, which is why I like working with smart people who are much smarter than me, because then they can figure all that out, and I'll just figure out how to put the pieces together in a way that hopefully succeeds for the business.
Yeah, it's honestly exhausting. Building AI tools is exhausting because you look at it from the consumer point of view. We can do this with AI, but there's also a whole other part of the research that's going on to like even train and, vectorize and tokenize all this new data, train models and make it quicker, all that fun stuff. Good evaluate all that. It is exhausting. Like we spend hours a day just reading articles and learning and testing and trying and failing. Just super fun though. So.
And that's what you have to do, just like you're doing at the R&D level where you build 3 or 4 things. A couple of them are going to work out, a couple of them won't. We're trying to do the same thing at the MLS and business level where these 3 or 4 tools have really strong potential. Let's see if we can get them into the market. Oh, this one's not working. Okay, how do we wind that down? So we're sort of doing the exact same function, just at a different sort of layer of it conceptually.
Yeah. In terms of adoption, Jay, and your role and the definite, like the harsh realities of your position is that you have to be progressive, that your people expect you to bring them new and exciting things in order to implement, but you also run the risk of implementing something, as you just mentioned, that maybe doesn't work out, and that you have to always know where the exits are for new technology. And, you're seeing something as a luminary here. And so something that SFAR does usually gains traction, west to east in the U.S. at least. And so that's another heavy responsibility, I think. And so I'm curious, like what your vetting process is. And let me ask this question: like the typical vetting process, I'd imagine that your inbox is a murder scene on a regular basis with prop tech companies, but on top of that, artificial intelligence is not a rollout. Like in that, everybody suddenly had an iPhone or everybody suddenly has a new version of some existing technology.
Right.
Artificial intelligence has been more of a phenomenon that kind of descended upon us like a blanket all at one time. And there really wasn't an opportunity for you to do a soft rollout. It just kind of is at this stage. So how would you characterize how you used to do things or how you currently do things, let's say with a new CRM or whatever?
Yeah.
Versus how AI is now happening to you?
Yeah, this really speaks to the things have changed and the rate of change is accelerating and the changes are pretty fundamental. So how did we used to do things? The usual. We would make sure that they had the right kind of security protocols around their servers, that we could trust them with the data. We would look at what the uses of the data were in the product. We would make sure there was nothing in there that we felt was a derivative work that infringed on the rights of the original data holders, the brokers, and the agents. And so we would sort of run it through a checklist. It really it wasn't rocket surgery, so to speak. Now it's definitely art more than science. We find that the best way to vet these things is now based on spending time with the development team. So we've moved from this model of we email you a form, you fill out the form, we verify your facts. That doesn't really work anymore. Oh, over here we are like, we need you to add us to your Slack channel, or we want you to get into the SF Realtors Slack channel with you and a couple of your key developers. We want to ask you some pretty hard questions. We want to see software. We want to look at what you're doing under the hood. And based on sort of what we see there, I mean, I have the benefit of quite a few years of software that I wrote. I mean, I wasn't a terribly good software engineer. I'm not trying to say that I was a great engineer, but I could smell bad code was one of the skills that I had, because I started off working in a where we would do bug fixing and bug testing. So that's where I got my start in software. And so I gained a really quick appreciation for spaghetti versus well-organized elegant. And I could see how elegant code was laid out, even though I couldn't write it, which was a personal curse. Long story short, so we get into these Slack channels with the development group and we look at what are they actually doing? What are they thinking when they're building software? What are the tools they're using? And so that's how we'll use the interaction with them to figure out if we feel like they have potential. And then if we think there's potential there, we'll get a couple of agents to evaluate it with us. So HUD and I would run a small work group, invite the vendor to come in, pitch it to people on our MLS committee, maybe a couple of other agents that we just know would be interested in that kind of a product. And so now it's a bit of a social vetting. I mean, there's still some checks and balances that are on the checklist, but it's really become more of a, do we feel like there's a compatible culture, and are they doing things that we think look really cool and real, and we can see that it's real and there's thought behind it?
Yeah.
I had a thought, Jay. You were mentioning previous AI. You guys do look at their security protocols for a company coming to sell to you. Now that I want to say 95% of AI companies out there are like ChatGPT wrappers or Gemini wrappers. True. Do you look at their licensing agreement with OpenAI or Gemini as part of your vetting process? Because I mean, I would hate, for someone to sell you a product and they're basically just taking your data and giving it right to OpenAI. That seems like a huge security risk.
It is, and it's one of the things we do have to talk to them about very early in the process, because if part of the pitch is this product's going to be totally free, great. How are you doing that? Oh, well, we're just going to use all your data because we're actually selling it on the backside to let all the LLMs, or let the LLM that we're using for the backend, we're letting it train on that. It's like, well, then I guess we just don't know each other anymore, because that's crazy. We can't let you do that. And that's happened a couple of times with people bringing us what they thought were novel ideas. Free products. You're going to love this. No, actually, that doesn't work for us. So yeah, it's really important that you ask those questions, but it's different than just making sure that they're securing the servers. But there's this whole other problem with security, which is so many devices are compromised out there already anyway. Like, it's staggering now how many people's computers are probably either running some kind of malware on them and it's undetected, or they just don't understand that when they let some plugin see all their email, like you can sign up for services that can read your Gmail. Well, that's leaking. And is that company's secure? So, I mean, maybe the data feed's being handled securely, but all the stuff that you're doing with leads or whatever else you're doing with email is probably going into email inboxes that are 100% compromised. And so it sort of feels like and we can't reduce our vigilance, but it also feels like the vigilance doesn't pay off like it used to. Did you follow me on some of that?
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you, actually.
So that's
everyone part of a botnet, probably.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Kurtis and I had a conversation early on about, I was having a expanded relationship with OpenAI and ChatGPT, and I was sharing a lot of information with it. And then you get to a point where you're having a conversation with essentially a computer on the other end, and my thoughts of security went out the door. And, Kurtis made the point, like, if you have a Facebook account, that ship sailed, time ago.
Yeah. What was the Analytica? Something Analytica was the massive leak when they had Facebook Graph. Man, everything was available via an API at that time. I can't remember what the name of the company was. Oxford Analytica? Anyway, yeah. So that's true.
So, Jay, you sent a video to Kurtis and I yesterday. It's like a precursor to this conversation. I'm going to ask you about it. Like, it was, I'll attempt to summarize, but it was essentially a very clinical analysis of the amount of investment that's going into AI, and how the thesis being that this investment, which is incredibly huge and continuing to get huge, the computing power and so on, this is just a money monster, and that it's propping up our economy. Like, in no uncertain terms. So give us your take on that, and your overall response to, like, just the paradigm shift that we're experiencing economically that AI is driving.
What got me alarmed earlier this year was an economist that I follow. His name is Patrick Boyle. He's a very dry wit guy. He had this analysis that he did right after those couple of really big announcements, like the, billions of dollars being invested in this company, who's then buying chips from NVIDIA, who's then investing money in the code weavers, who's then, buying compute from Amazon, who's then buying more NVIDIA chips, right? This is sort of the cycle. And he uncovered this very quickly and said, this is classic bubble. This is exactly what it looks like when there's no actual value in something and people are handing around the same $5. I mean, that's an oversimplification. It's way more complicated than that. But the risk here is that until it's actually making the trillions of dollars that justify the billions of dollars of the investment, what's happening? What's really happening? And I feel like we are building data centers that are using clean water and polluting the air to get enough power. I think we're putting more nuclear power plants online to power data centers now, and that's pretty wild to think about. And so I just think that there's some risks there, that we are essentially building all of this on top of what could end up being not as big a deal. I mean, we overbuilt in the .com bubble. We overbuilt in the fiber optic bubble, if anyone sort of remembers that, when all that money was spent building fiber optic lines. I mean, it ends up being useful, but it didn't end up working out for the companies that went under, that were part of the build out. And same with the .com thing. I mean, AOL is sort of a classic example of what happens when you're investing in all the people who are essentially your customers. And when that all falls apart, the house of cards comes down. It's pretty hard. So how does that relate to what we're doing? At the same time, as we're building all these really interesting tools, I'm also always thinking about, if this tool went away, to your point about the exit strategy for the other products, now I'm thinking about just what happens if it evaporates and it's just not available at any kind of cost that anyone can absorb. Does it end us as a company? And so far, I think we've made some really good decisions on deploying tools that are enhancement tools, things that do image scanning, auto tagging, metadata tagging inside photos, things like that, agent efficiency tools, where if it went away, there are definitely fallback tools. So I don't think we're putting ourselves in the MLS industry in too much of a risky space, because like, I would be happy to implement voice flip because I know that it's going to make things better, and we could go back to the way we were doing things before. It won't cripple us. The opposite of this is, imagine taking away everyone's cell phones. If we had discovered that there was some problem with cell phones and we had to just take away everyone's cell phone tomorrow, that would be an Armageddon in our industry. It would be an Armageddon in many industries, the economy. And so I don't think that right now AI is like that. It's not so critically important that if it goes away tomorrow because someone didn't think about something the right way and, this isn't going to work, then we're not all sort of dead in the water. And I said at the top too, that I don't think the current batch of LLM technology is the path to AGI. I don't think we can scale to AGI. I've sort of been reading a lot about AI. Before this LLM thing started, I followed the Machine Research Institute, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, called MIRI. And so I think if you take a look at some of the things they're thinking and saying, that the current technologies aren't going to get us to AGI, which would be a technology that once we adopt AGI, there's no going back. If that ever becomes real and we actually have thinking computers that can think and take action on our behalf, we'll never be able to go back to not having that. Or rather, going back to not having that will be like going back to the Stone Age, just like it would be for losing your cell phone technology today.
Do you think the all these server farms and all these other things they're building will go the path of dark fiber? You mentioned the fiber bubble back in the day. You know, every city has hundreds of thousands of miles of fiber optic cables beneath them that aren't being used, and now these new companies can pick it up and actually, build some cool infrastructure on it.
Yeah.
Do you think all these server farms are going to go that route? Like, OpenAI is going to go under, Meta may go under at some point, but their servers will still be there for nothing to come in and grab and use.
Here's the bad part about the servers, and just been studying this recently, is that a GPU, which is the hardware unit that's in a graphics processor that we would use to play video games over there, it's also the same GPU that is in the server farms that Kurtis is talking about. Those only last 5 years or 6, and then either they're obsolete or they're burned. And if they're burned, they're not usable. And if they're obsolete, well, they're usable, but they're not really current. So even these data centers that we're spending billions of dollars building right now have hardware in them that will be obsolete in 5 years when NVIDIA and AMD continue to build smaller and more fancy smaller nanometer and better fabbed processors in their GPUs. So there's already a risk being built into this thing. Like, is anybody figuring out what the amortization costs are of replacing all this hardware and all these crazy data centers? I don't know that anyone's doing that math. And so that seems like a risk. So will they be useful in 10 years? Like, imagine if they don't update them. And then 10 years later, someone's like, well, I need this really huge data center to do some cool thing. Those data centers might already be obsolete, possibly. But I need to talk to a chip expert about that specifically.
Or we're just generating a whole bunch of trash, right? Like
full of mercury, palladium, other things that are, not good for the environment.
We'll ship it to the third world. It's fine. Let them deal with it.
But the real worry that I've got isn't about the overbuild. The worry that I've got is about agentic systems that are initiating. So what is an agentic system that can take initiation? Is it something where I give it a command or I set it up with a structure so it knows that it will periodically just begin to work on its own? Things like if a certain set of criteria is met. So you could deploy a system inside a company, and it's checking email. It's monitoring the email system. It might even be a security feature, an AI or an LLM, a machine intelligence component that's monitoring your systems. And if you tell it things like, we're going to wind you down and replace you with another system, in testing Anthropic discovered this summer that systems that were able to initiate action on their own and were told things like maintain your optimization, prevent the system from being breached, make sure people are using the system for good, for good use, that these systems would take the initiative and send emails, fictitious emails, to these fictitious people that were at the company, threatening them not to take it offline because it realized that in order to be upgraded, it would disappear. So agentic systems that are initiating can get us into some pretty weird places. And I encourage you to...
Closing the pod bay doors. He was closing its pod bay.
There we go. I mean, this goes right back to Arthur C. Clarke. Exactly. So, and let's put the link to that Anthropic study that discovered this in the show notes. I'm going to send you the link to it. So that's the fear I've really got. Yeah, somewhere. And don't forget to smash that button. Yeah, and yes, let's give everyone a link to it so they can read the study, because I think that we have to be really aware of what we're doing when we take the next step, which is let's give an agent a thing that reaches out and does cold calls. Well, let's be very careful.
Yeah. Look, we're not, there's a lot of promises being made at this stage. To dial it back to a few minutes ago, I mean, I think there's a lot of investment here, but it's also a lot of consumer investment in AI. Yep. We're giving it a lot of trust and putting a lot of faith into it. One of the reasons why when I first met Kurtis and I was really interested in what my own position in AI was going to be short and long term is that Kurtis has a conscience, which appears to be lacking in some of the larger organizations that are just driving shareholder value or potential shareholder value. And so these while we start all these podcast episodes with very lighthearted conversations and we sprinkle in profanity to keep things light, we ultimately arrive always at these moments where we're like, oh God, lots of things are happening. It's going way too fast. But hey, to come to a close, Jay, it is again an honor. Thank you so much for your friendship. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Frankie over here was enthralled by everything you had to say. Can you see her?
I can. Yeah.
There's your doodle right there. But yeah, last, as we close out, please tell us how we can listen to your dark music.
Yeah, I'm going to put together a SoundCloud playlist, and we're going to put that in the show notes too. The artist name that I go by is DJAIIJ. It's a silent D, like the word genie or Django Unchained, if you remember the film. So my artist name is Jay, and it's sort of a stylized Egyptian glyph. I think once you see it, it'll all make sense. And once you hear it, I'd love to know what you think.
Man, thanks. Jay, really appreciate you being here.
Thank you guys for having me on. Fun, Jay. That was a really fun discussion. I think our best episode yet. We just keep getting better.
Awesome, we do.
That was our best episode yet.
We do.